Bitcoin, July 22nd, and as we can see, it's already starting this climb, aiming for the 68,000 zone. We've seen over the past week how it's consolidating the 64,000 area from below. You can see that it tried to touch that level repeatedly over and over until it finally managed to break through. Once it broke through, it pulled back a bit to regain some strength and has now started this run, leaving the 64,000 area as a solid support. It's beginning to climb, not in a very dramatic way as we saw yesterday with the first attempt, almost reaching the 67,000 zone, getting up to 66,800. Now, it's going to start a bit of a pullback, and like I said, it'll take on a staircase pattern 65, then it'll surpass this high and try to reach close to 68, maybe even go past it. And then it'll come back again to the 60 area more nearby. What we're doing here, this forecast we make on this channel, we do it based solely on one element. The element is not indicators, of course, but rather studying what the big players are doing. The big players always try to trick you. They want retail traders' money to execute their strategy. They gather it, they collect it little by little. For example, in this accumulation zone, they quietly scoop up that money, making retail traders believe, through indicators and price movements, that the market is going to move in the opposite direction, even causing a drop of this magnitude. And then they take it exactly to the move or area they wanted. Wyckoff describes this perfectly in my course. I'll leave the link in the description. I explain to you how these phases of accumulation, distribution, markup, and markdown work and what strategies to use at each stage. But what's important to understand is that it's not the indicators that will make you money in trading, but rather figuring out what those who are manipulating the market are doing. All right, without further ado, let's bring up, as always, the price action, which are the fundamental elements that will give you basically the map through which Bitcoin is going to move. It's like a real life map. You have a map and you know exactly where the road goes. You know it goes from north to south, from east to west, whatever it may be, but what you want to know is which direction it's heading. And the direction is given to you by the volume. In this case, it tells you the direction the price is going to take. And first, we lay out that plan. We know where it's going, like I told you, 68, then 60, and we determine the direction by always looking for volume. Then we'll add simple volume to see what the institutions are doing. Very well, without further ado, let's look for those Wyckoff zones, like we do every day, first in the long term and then on the 4-hour chart, which is the key one. In the long term, now each month, each candle represents a week. We're in a wick-off accumulation zone, also in an accumulation zone at the upper part. When it reaches this yellow zone, which is 68, a little more, that's the most important area to keep in mind because it could break through and enter a markup phase. In that case, we would be looking at a minimum of 80,000. But an even more interesting area is the 90,000 zone, where a significant distribution could take place. Since the previous one was very small and the big players still have money in their coffers and want to sell at a pretty high position. All right, we've already marked that Wyckoff zone accumulation in the long term, and we need to keep that in mind to go to headquarters, which is the 4-hour chart, and see what they're doing. Okay, we have, as I mentioned before, the accumulation. Let's zoom in and take a look at it. It started here by breaking through the 68 zone, aiming for the 60 zone. With some perspective, you can clearly see what's happening. Here we see 67 already aiming for the 68 zone, but you know that whenever the price reaches a zone, it always reacts in a certain way. For example, here when it went for the 60 zone, it dropped almost to the 58 zone, but it's still the same 60 zone. It's part of the same move. The big players will always try to confuse you. That's why you see these kinds of moves. Now, for example, we're seeing that it's reached this 66 zone, like I mentioned, 66,800, maybe a bit more. And if we look at it from this perspective, it's very similar to the last high we saw in the upward movement. It could already be starting that move towards 60. It could be. Basically, the possibility we see is that since there's been a lot of movement in this middle part of the channel, it's most likely going to surpass the previous high. But it could also not happen. It could go back down to the 60 zone. That's why you have to pay close attention to the volume, to how the big players react, always keeping an eye on that. Let's quit it. You can use different volume indicators, whichever one you feel most comfortable with, but I recommend just using simple volume. The simpler your chart is, the easier it'll be to see things. It's like now, when we're looking at the movement with some perspective, it looks pretty clear. It's harder to see it right in the moment when it's happening in real time, but here we have an idea of what's going on. What I was saying about simple volume, always look for volume spikes above 1.5. Lately, there hasn't been much activity, and now the big players show up with volume spikes even below 1.3, but they're manipulating that movement. You can see how there was significant manipulation here when it reached the high I mentioned at 66,800. In any case, let's see how it forms the staircase I was telling you about. If it's going to look for a higher high, in any case, it's going to regain a bit of strength. And it could be, let's consider two possibilities. The first, which I think is more likely, is that it drops to the area around 65 to gain more strength, then goes for a higher high, and then finally heads toward the 60 area. That is, we could say possibility A. And possibility B is that the high of this move, 60, 68, 66, 60, has already been reached in the 66,800 area, and it's already gradually heading toward the 60 area. In any case, if what you're doing is intraday trading or scalping, the best option right now is to go short, aiming for that area near 65. If when it gets to that 65 area, you see strong volume, then we would go long. If we don't see that strong volume and a contrary price reaction, we would stay short until the absolute 64 area. Because even if it heads towards 60, when it crosses the 64 zone, it won't do so abruptly, but will linger there for a while. It might do something like here, a long candle, and then come back and retest, or it could just keep retesting for a week or two. We tend to think that these moves will happen overnight, but that's not the case. This forecast is for a week, and when I'm talking about hitting 60, we're already talking about a longer time frame. All right, we've set the forecast for 1 week. Option A, touch 65 and look for somewhere near 68. Option B, go straight for the middle of the channel at 64. Let's take a look at the short term. You see what we're looking at? It might look really small because I have the volume on, but in this case, that's important. See this wick that shows up right here? We have three elements giving us a short-term movement, like this really big wick on this candle. It's basically a shooting star. See, the candle spread is tiny and there's a really long wick. That's called a shooting star. Then we're also seeing wicks on the other two candles, the ones on either side of the shooting star, which are giving us downward movement. Then there's another element, which is reaching a support resistance zone, like 60, 66,000, and we're also seeing an increase in volume. Not a huge one compared to other really significant moments, but a bit higher than what we saw during the previous day. Those three elements together are telling us that for scalping or intraday trading, going short could be a very important opportunity. If you like this way of of getting into the chart for intraday or scalping, I have a VIP Telegram group where I share the two trades I make every day. I'll leave the link in the description. Now, without further ado, let's check out the July challenge. Here's the trade I made yesterday. You can see that I started with $500 on July 1st, and I want to show you that by entering in a simple way, whether it's with the trades I share in the VIP Telegram or just by following the trend of the movements once a day, that's all you need. You can pretty much double your capital. I'll show you the take profit as low. MXC sends me the take profit when the order to take the $25 is executed. Currently, the account is at 882. Let's hope we reach $1,000 and the amount over 500. That is, if I reach $1,000, I will raffle off those 500 in profits among everyone who signs up at mex.com and makes their first deposit. I'm Mikel Vasquez, and this is Daily Bitcoin Analysis. Thank you so much for watching this video, and as I always say, this is not financial advice. I'm just sharing my experience with you after more than 15 years in professional trading. Tomorrow, my vacation ends, and it looks like I'm finally getting over this cold. My voice is better too. I'll be back to my regular recording routine you'll see me on camera again too. Right now, since I didn't bring my recording equipment, just my laptop, I'm only recording the screen. But tomorrow, I'll do a normal recording again. See you tomorrow. Thank you very much.